Warning: the following film contains material that some may find triggering. In 2020, the United Nations reported that, while everyone faced unprecedented challenges, the social and economic impacts of the global pandemic fell harder on women than men. The impact of COVID-19 on women, April 2020. As part of the Woman Up project, Workie Ticket have been talking and listening to women from across our region about their experiences of the pandemic and how it has impacted their lives.
So I'm Elaine and I am Service Director here at Newcastle Women's Aid. I've worked here for 25 years plus, and we are a service who provides domestic abuse specialist support services to women and girls who are all impacted by domestic violence and abuse within their intimate relationships.
Within the Woman Up project, we explore the impact the pandemic has had on women at home, at work, in the community, on their mental health and their bodies.
My own personal feelings was, I remember now, I think about it quite often, I think a bit of panic, fear, a lot of fear. And I think I absolutely reverted straight back into the role of being that nurturing, caring woman who had to step up and had to organise everything for everyone, make sure everyone was okay within me personal life and within me professional life.
Women from across the Northeast were invited to take part in workshops, one-to-one interviews, send in pandemic portraits, answer an online survey, or invited to scream.
We were not exactly prepared, like I think a lot of people would not have been prepared for those restrictions that was imposed very quickly.
Yeah.
We know we have an excellent service that does excellent work, but to work with those restrictions was something different. And when we're doing the work, working with women face to face. We were kept apart. So, and our organisation was not fully set up to be able to deal with that.
Our aim is to explore and amplify the experiences of a broad spectrum of women who live in our region and to share how we coped or not in order to survive the pandemic.
We were up and running very, very quickly. So, within 5 weeks of lockdown, we were back in, I was back in, and we had a rota of people coming back because we were more effective and efficient working from our base.
Yeah.
So we were able to make it COVID safe, satisfy the guidelines. And I think we are dead proud that like week 5, we were doing some remote, but it was being coordinated and worked on from our base. And I think we were one of the first agencies working back.
The following is a collection of the women's testimonies, created by using verbatim material from interviews, workshops and survey responses, read by actors. Her Primal Scream. Where are you from?
Heaton,
Whitley Bay,
South Tyneside,
Houghton Le Spring,
Morpeth,
Northumberland,
South Shields,
North Tyneside,
Forest Hall,
Shiremoor,
Gateshead,
Shotley Bridge,
Walker,
Wallsend,
Warkworth,
Teesside,
Amble,
Killingworth,
Newcastle.
the North East.
What was lockdown like for you?
Lonely.
Isolating.
I had to shield.
It was stressful because I thought I was going to lose my business.
I have 3 children and 1 work laptop. You can imagine the rest.
An utter nightmare. I'm a teacher and give me a class of 30 over my own children any day.
I live in quite a deprived rural area with very little within walking distance, and I started to dislike living here. There was all this very unclear talk about exercising from home or driving to exercise and only using public transport if it was essential. I felt like it was coming from a very privileged perspective.
My sister was struggling in a very abusive relationship before the lockdown, and I feared for her life during it. There were periods where she was silent. She said she was learning to cope, to survive. The idea that you could just ring a number or do a hand signal to get help, it's very misleading.
Made an attempt on my life and relapsed into significant self-harm. I wouldn't say the pandemic caused that, but I couldn't run away from myself or my mental health anymore, and everything just felt like a lot, overwhelming and impossible. Crisis services and community mental health services were overwhelmed. It took me 3 months to get a letter for an assessment phone call, and 8 months to get an appointment.
I was expected to do the cooking, ironing, housework, homeschool and work.
I spent time with my family. Although I couldn't visit my parents and then couldn't go into the house, still haven't given them a hug.
I went online a lot more, and unfortunately it affected my mental health, as there was a lot of bad news, more trolling and more racist and sexist comments.
I was a key worker at a supermarket. I did all the housework even though my husband was working from home.
I'm a single woman who lives alone. I consider myself independent and I enjoy my own company, but it felt like an emotional roller coaster at times.
I clapped for the NHS to begin with because it felt like a protest, a way of showing the government that we wouldn't stand for the way that nurses and doctors and key workers were being exploited, but I stopped when it became an empty gesture and no longer a protest.
My father-in-law died during lockdown, a very short but painful battle with cancer. Navigating the emotions with this when living in such an intense situation as lockdown was difficult, and supporting other family members from a distance, it was heartbreaking.
I gave birth mostly alone. My husband was only allowed in the ward during active labour. That went on all night and resulted in an emergency C-section at 6 a.m. It was the scariest time of my life. I was left alone with a newborn baby, unable to actually move from my bed. I don't think I'll ever understand the logic behind that, all whilst bars and restaurants were open.
I volunteered to deliver cooked meals and food parcels to those that desperately needed them when I had spare time from my own caring responsibilities. This meant I felt more connected to the community.
The pandemic had an impact on my relationship with my partner because I took out all my frustrations on him. I went from going to work every week and going out everywhere with my little girl to being at home 24/7, pregnant and with a toddler. I resented him slightly because the way I saw it, he still got to go out and socialise, see people, even if it was work.
I miss my grandchildren. That made me cry a lot.
My relationship with my sister-in-law blossomed as we were both pregnant. We completely understood each other and we could vent our frustrations without being judged. We used to joke that the pandemic was like the Handmaid's Tale for women. She was, is my rock.
At the start of the pandemic, me and my partner decided it wasn't safe for me to continue to go to work, as I worked in a nursing home, the front line, so to speak. About a week after, I received a phone call from a manager saying that I could be furloughed due to being pregnant, which was a huge relief, but the week after this phone call, I received another one saying that I could no longer be furloughed. I was told to get a sick note from the doctor, otherwise I wouldn't get paid.
I was happy in lockdown. I struggled with crowds. I clapped for the NHS, started growing dozens of plants and had time to explore my creative side. Our local pub during lockdown would leave a keg outside for all us to go fill up our pitchers and cups every weekend for free. Even though it was a happy time for me, I recognised that it wasn't for a lot of women, especially those with children.
We were told it was only going to be 3 weeks, and most sex workers have savings, but not to last as long as what this has gone on.
My dad caught COVID in hospital, then developed long COVID. Watched him crash twice while I was standing on the other side of a window. They were about to discharge him when he became too ill to move. It took him over a month to die. Just me sitting with him on his own while he developed terminal agitation, no palliative care. I had to make a complaint for him to get the pain relief he needed.
I had a baby just before lockdown. My postpartum aftercare was affected by the midwife's reluctance to visit homes. Newborn assessment by health visitor was socially distanced, and then I've not seen them since.
I run a domestic abuse charity. During lockdown, even I was thinking, where the hell are we here? What will ever make women and girls feel safe?
Is there a woman from the Northeast who inspired you to get through the pandemic?
My mum.
My sister.
All the women in my life.
My partner, who I met and fell in love with during the pandemic.
My nan.
All the women who worked alongside us in the hospital, who left their families every day and worked on the front line.
All my circle.
My sister-in-law.
Sarah West, CEO of Tall Tales Mysteries.
The women from Women's Workshop.
Helen Hall, who's a midwife at the RVI.
Sarah Hughes, who raised loads of money for charity.
Rosa Stewart-McCreary.
Ellie North, a fitness coach.
Rosie Ramsey.
All the mums we support at the food bank.
My friend Lynn, who works in the COVID ward.
All the other mums who stuck it out during homeschooling.
Laura Rothwell, Bex Mather, Stacey McLaughlin, Zara Ravenscroft, Beth Marston, Everly Gray. I could go on for a while.
Jojo Kirtley.
Taking inspiration from the Primal Scream New York Times 2020 article about homeschooling, we asked women, what made you scream throughout the pandemic?
Zoom quizzes.
Boris Johnson, every time I saw him.
I wanted to scream at anyone who broke the rules.
I wanted to scream 2 weeks after my daughter went back to school. She had to isolate because of a COVID outbreak.
The lack of support for me as a carer made me very frustrated, especially as I was dealing with a recent diagnosis of ill health myself.
Rich people flying off the Maldives when we were told not to travel.
I did a lot of wanting to scream, but I tried to hold it together for the kids.
I wanted to scream because I couldn't see me eldest son who is in a residential home because he's severely disabled. I've seen him 3 times in 18 months. It broke my heart.
The screaming comes from a forever life of domesticity. My plan was never to be a stay-at-home mum or a work-from-home mum.
The plight of people in care homes has made me want to scream.
The death toll.
The daily briefings.
Being expected to crack on. Who wants to woman up when we're living life in a pandemic? I just wanted to watch Netflix and not worry, but unfortunately, when you're a man, you can't.
Almost everything made me want to scream, none more so than everyone suddenly and publicly becoming an expert in medicine, politics, law, virology, and education.
Pressure of work and looking after my daughter made me want to scream. I felt like I was doing both not very well.
I screamed inside at no one listening.
Catching COVID in January 2021, so we had to isolate overall around 3 weeks as we got it one after the other.
When the teacher finished a lesson and she rattled off another list of activities to do for the day.
People refusing to wear masks.
I wanted to scream during the pandemic as we struggled to get funding from different sources, even though we were running an emergency service.
When I lost my mum.
Living in silence, not being able to communicate. I think I would have welcomed screaming. But when you can't, what can you do?
Watching me 4 children say goodbye to their granddad through a window. No hugs or kisses for 4 months.
The bloody internet connection.
Cease and benefit systems and utter failure to support the most precarious workers during one of the worst times for their industry in history.
I wanted to scream at my daughter's partner because he treated her with so much disrespect.
Sometimes I screamed. Other times I laughed. I think I cried more though. I cried when it got too much and I realised it was going to be a very long time before I would see, hug or kiss my family and friends.
I really struggled with how divided people were and how willing people were to police others' behaviours.
That it took a pandemic for doctors, nurses and carers to be recognised for the job that they do.
My lack of access to contraception. I was due to get my depot injection and couldn't get an appointment for 6 weeks. I told them it was an emergency and I needed to go, but I was refused consistently.
Teachers and police officers not receiving their vaccines early and having no access to PPE.
I feel like the attention to maternity was severely neglected.
The murder of Sarah Everard.
Being criticised on social media for supporting Black Lives Matter.
I screamed at being expected to be strong and cope. To have to woman up, but how could we? During a collective trauma where people are dying alone, losing jobs, and suffering of their mental health.
Globally, a countless number of women in economies of every size were losing income and jobs, having to carry out unpaid care, had increased domestic work, were more likely to homeschool, were more likely to experience domestic violence, and were being denied access to sexual and reproductive health, as well as maternity care and support. This includes women from the North East.
Whatever you want to call it, protest, demonstrate, whatever you want to call it. They came out because they felt strongly about, violence against women and girls, and whether we seen them scenes, and everybody did want to light the candle, show respect, come out in like kind of to show we're all there together and to show that this is a massive kind of problem for women and girls all over the world really. But they came out to do that, and then we seen them terrible scenes. And yeah, Jojo, there was terrible things said, women wearing, they should be, they shouldn't encourage you because of what they're wearing, and all of that kind of stuff started. And I remember thinking, where the hell are we here? Where the hell are we? Where are we going?
COVID has unleashed the most severe setback to women's liberation in my lifetime. While watching this happen, I have started to think we are witnessing an outbreak of disaster patriarchy. All over the world, patriarchy has taken full advantage of the virus to reclaim power. On the one hand, escalating the danger and violence to women, and on the other, stepping in as their supposed controller and protector. V, formerly known as Eve Ensler, The Guardian 2021, Disaster Patriarchy, How the Pandemic Has Unleashed a War on Women. Workie Ticket's aim is to change the history into her story, to educate, empower and enable women and girls so they feel inspired to speak out and fight for gender justice. What next for women?